Oh, Mr. Farquaad, right on time. Please come in.
Oh, thank you.
Shrek is a franchise that I was pretty obsessed with seeing as a kid and as an adult. I'd say that I'm more interested in seeing the movies while only giving attention to the specials and TV shows when I feel like it. Welcome back to my Dreamworks Villains Retrospective, and today, we will be looking into the rogues gallery of one of Dreamworks' most famous franchises. But first, as always, let's start with where Dreamworks even got the idea. Shrek began as a simple children's book created by William Steig. Shrek in the book is also the villain who willingly goes out of his way to terrify the living heck out of people just for fun. After his parents decide that he's old enough to cause damage out into the world, they tell him to leave, a plot element that would be shown in the future Broadway play, and Shrek soon meets a witch who predicts that he will find a princess who is just as repulsive looking as she is locked in a tower, defeat a knight guarding the tower and marry her. Shrek likes the idea of wanting to be with someone who is just as disgusting as he is and goes on a journey to find her. To make a long story short, he does find and marry her, and they spend their days terrorizing others with their ugliness. This story definitely is something different from the movie, I'll tell you that much. You might be thinking that Shrek couldn't possibly be a bad guy since he was just scaring other people with his ugliness instead of killing them. Well, I can understand that, only if you read the book, which truth be told I never did and only got this information online. Shrek at one point steals and eats a pheasant belonging to a farmer with a scythe who was going to eat it himself. Not really the most horrible thing a person can do, but still villainous in a sense. Despite this, Shrek does have his sympathetic moments, like how he does feel lonely terrifying others and wants someone who enjoys being as ugly as him. Also, when he enters the tower, he does show some hidden insecurities when he enters a room full of mirrors that show his hideous reflection. He manages to build up his confidence enough to push forward, but this shows that maybe he isn't as content with his ugly mug as we're led to believe. Moving on, when Jeffrey Katzenberg learned about the book after producer John H. Williams bought a copy of it to work, Katzenberg saw an opportunity to make the next Dreamworks CGI animated film after Ants. If you are well aware of the movie's production, then you'd know that before Mike Myers, 90s comedian Chris Farley was the first actor who took on the voice of the titular Green Ogre, but he couldn't finish the lines after his demise in 1997. What little they got out of him was an animation test that wasn't unleashed to the public until 2023 and featured a different design of Shrek dancing around an empty town to the tune of I Feel Good by James Brown. Surprisingly, this test short had a villain of its own, which was a mugger wearing a black mask voiced by Tom Kenny, who tries to rob Shrek, but the latter defeats him by pulling on a rope that's suspending the mugger and sending him flying. I think I've said enough about Shrek's origins, both in book form and movie form, so let's get into the franchise's first official villain. Since the original book only had its protagonist as the bad guy, obviously the people of Dreamworks decided to create another physical entity for our favorite Green Ogre to go up against. That entity is none other than the only villain in the Shrek universe who isn't a fairy tale or nursery rhyme character, Lord Farquaad. Looking into how he was during the movie's production stages, a deleted scene told by production artist Chris Miller through storyboards shows that Farquaad was going to be a bit of a real estate developing villain and got rid of the fairy tale characters and sent them to Shrek's swamp as he was going to tear down their homes to create the usual superfluous establishments, but says that he'd be willing to remove them from the swamp if Shrek goes to get Fiona for him. This was most likely changed to make Farquaad less like a stereotypical businessman and more as an arrogant monarch, which would fit the movie's fairy tale theme. Another deleted scene implied that he was an ambitious regent who took over Fiona's kingdom after her parents died and she was locked in the tower, and since this would most likely give Fiona a more personal rivalry to Farquaad than Shrek, the filmmakers cut that out as well. Originally, British actor Alan Rickman was asked to voice Farquaad, but Rickman declined and was more interested in playing Professor Severus Snape from the Harry Potter movies. Soon though, veteran actor John Lithgow took on the part. On a personal note, for a long time after I saw Shrek, Farquaad was the only character I was familiar with regarding Lithgow's filmography, and it wouldn't be until 2011 where I found out Lithgow played Reverend Shaw Moore in the Kevin Bacon movie, Footloose, after I saw the latter movie's remake in the aforementioned year. Going back to Rickman, I should probably note that in a sense of irony, Lithgow is currently playing Professor Dumbledore in the upcoming Harry Potter series that's going to be released on HBO next year. Here's hoping he is able to keep pushing until the show gets to book 7. One last production trivia regarding Farquaad I'd like to talk about is how it is rumored that Katzenberger had Farquaad modeled after then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. While there's no official confirmation for this, Eisner felt offended at the film's tendency to poke fun at Disney movies and created Chicken Little hoping that it would be in the same league as Shrek. To anyone who knows of Chicken Little and how it could potentially compare to Shrek, you might see how that turned out. With all that out of the way, let's now start talking about Farquaad himself. To put it simply, I can see why he's the first Shrek villain because compared to the rest down the line, Farquaad is as basic as they come. What do I mean? Well, he happens to be a very generic tyrant. To make a list of what to expect from this type of character, he has a prejudice against a certain race, in this case fairy tale creatures, for no other reason than because he views them as lesser beings. He makes said creatures victims of segregation and exiles them to parts unknown where he doesn't have to deal with them and make his kingdom perfect. The way he rules his kingdom is no different and he isn't well liked. Being a simple lord isn't enough for him and he wants to be a king, but to do that, he must first marry a princess and instead of going to get the princess himself, he has someone else do it for him and when they deliver, he takes credit for the delivery. Despite him being rather one-note, we do see how much of a negative impact his actions have left as at the start of the movie, some fairy tale characters, or any strange creature in general, are being sold to Farquaad's men. Shrek himself is almost arrested when the soldiers find him after chasing Donkey, but he manages to scare them off. Farquaad's first major appearance is when he interrogates the living gingerbread man Gingy for information on any other fairy tale creature who might be hiding from him. Despite what I said about him being generic, anyone who saw the movie and isn't a little kid can most likely pick up that Shrek's line about Farquaad compensating for something isn't too far off base when we see that he is about the height of a preteen.
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
Oh, that's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
Yep, it is heavily implied that Farquaad's bad attitude stems from insecurity regarding how he is basically a midget and how his vision for a perfect kingdom is a way for him to assuage his bitterness. Other forms of him compensating for his shortcomings is also shown in one scene in his bedroom, which is covered from head to toe with the most lavish of items. Another layer to Farquaad is that he can be funny sometimes, like when Gingy distracts him from his interrogation by having him accidentally recite the Muffin Man rhyme. He also has some funny banter with the other characters as well, from Shrek to the Magic Mirror. Looking into his relationship to the people he's governing, like I said before, he isn't well liked by them and even he seems to be aware of how unpopular he is, but honestly couldn't care less about their views of him and since he is in a position of authority, they don't seem keen on rebelling against him for fear of consequences and as shown in the tournament and wedding scenes, he has his subordinates hold up signs for the people to react. Even his own soldiers are expandable to him as he states when starting the tournament that if the winning soldier dies, he will simply send the next soldier and so on. I'm kind of curious to know what would happen if he ran out of soldiers. To nitpick any more traits from Farquaad, despite his dislike for fairy tale creatures, he seems quite selective of what creatures to keep around if they prove to be of use to him, as he keeps the magic mirror to ask him how to become a king, though Farquaad doesn't pay attention to the mirror when he attempts to warn him about Fiona's ogre form and even cuts him off when he attempts to officially tell him, an action that ends up coming back to haunt him when the curse rears its head during his wedding near the film's end. Of course, even if a non-fairy tale creature were to make an attempt to tell him, Farquaad most likely would still not listen. It appears that when it comes to his ego, Farquaad tends to tune everything else out. For the most part, after Farquaad makes the deal with Shrek, he is mostly unused until the ending, except for the aforementioned scene in his bedroom, which does give a subtle adult moment. When Shrek brings him to meet Fiona in a fit of frustration due to misunderstanding her when he eavesdrops on her and Donkey during the night, we do see that Farquaad was willing to honor his agreement at vacating Shrek's swamp once the latter has fulfilled his end of the bargain, though whether or not this is one redeeming quality he has is apparently up for interpretation. To scrutinize one scene involving him for a minute, during the film's sad montage with Rufus Wainwright's Hallelujah playing in the background, while the rest of the characters are miserable as heck, Farquaad is the only one who seems to be happy as he prepares for the wedding. I'd like to talk about my thoughts on this scene. To get my problems with it out of the way, maybe it was for comedic and/or dramatic effect, but the fact that he's the only one happy seems to establish that he's the villain, which feels pretty redundant since we already know he is. For things I like about it, it probably adds some kind of levity to a depressing moment. Because seeing Farquaad preparing for his ascension to kingship feels humorous in a way, though the fact that he might get away with his cruel acts does add in a sense of sadness. I'm just going to skip to the end of this segment here since this might be a 2-hour-long video if I scrutinize every scene. Farquaad tries to marry Fiona, Shrek interrupts, Fiona later reveals her true self, Farquaad gets disgusted and orders the guards to remove Fiona and Shrek has Dragon come and eat Farquaad. To end things off here, I personally think that this is the most anticlimactic way to kill off a villain since it seems to be sudden, though it does bring some catharsis because, come on, the guy was a total dirtbag. Farquaad is briefly seen in the Shrek in the Swamp karaoke dance party short when the first film came out on video where he is seen inside Dragon's stomach trying to survive and even sings part of the Bee Gees song, Stayin' Alive, with Dragon putting a microphone to her belly to make him more audible. It's very likely that shortly after, he was digested. Moving on to other villains in the first movie, we got the first of some established henchmen for Farquaad. Thelonious, voiced by longtime Dreamworks editor Christopher Knights, is the local executioner in Duloc, due to how he wears a black hood with only yellow holes to see out of, who also seems to be the most closest to Farquaad, almost as if he's his personal assistant, as Thelonious is he one who advised Farquaad to pick Fiona when the magic mirror showed Farquaad a vision of 3 potential bachelorette princesses, and he even gives Farquaad a thumbs up when he poses in front of the magic mirror during the Hallelujah scene. Looking at Thelonious as a person, he seems to be a comic relief. Yes, the executioner outfit does make him look menacing, but he speaks with a very funny British accent. In terms of how Farquaad treats Thelonious, it's implied that the latter, like the rest of Duloc, doesn't hold his boss in high regard as he doesn't react to Farquaad's demise, hinting that behind closed doors, Farquaad was probably just as abusive to Thelonious as anyone else, or just treated him indifferently. Either way, to show support for Shrek and Fiona, Thelonious holds up a sign that cues the wedding audience to coo at the 2 ogres when they are about to kiss, and he also appears attending Shrek and Fiona's wedding at the end of the movie, and he also appears in the karaoke short, singing the song Feelings. That's where Thelonious' story ends in the first movie, but I'll come back to Farquaad and him in a little bit. The other established henchman of Lord Farquaad is his captain of the guards. Voiced by Jim Cummings, this man seems to only be defined by his loyalty to Farquaad, or at least, his adherence to his duty. He first appears overseeing the segregation of fairy tale creatures. While the character doesn't have a fleshed-out personality, he does set an event into motion, which is Donkey first meeting Shrek after Donkey's former owner tried to sell him for some shillings, and of course, I've already talked about the scene where the captain tries to place Shrek under arrest. He later appears bringing Farquaad the magic mirror and is soon ordered by Farquaad to assemble his finest soldiers for the tournament of who will go get Fiona. After that, he doesn't appear again, though I guess he wasn't too keen on finding out he's out of a job after Farquaad was killed. As for the guards themselves, they are just your typical grunts in coated armor who follow Farquaad's commands. One that kind of stands out is an archer next to Farquaad's side who asks him if they should kill Shrek after the latter pummels the guards when he comes to Duloc to complain about the fairy tale creatures in his swamp. They don't have any established voice actors, so let's move on. There are at least 2 group of villains from the first movie who are unaffiliated with Farquaad. The first being a blatant Robin Hood guy named Monsieur Hood, voiced by real-life French actor Vincent Cassel, alongside his band of merrymen, with Little John being voiced by Matthew Gonder, while the rest are voiced by Guillaume Aritos, Calvin Remsburg, Jean-Paul Vignon, and John Bism. While all the others are actors, Aritos stands out because he's actually a production designer from France who would voice 2 other minor villains from the Shrek franchise, Jerome from Shrek 2 and the Whisperer from the Puss in Boots short, The Three Diablos. They first appear when Shrek, Donkey and Fiona are walking through the forest where Monsieur Hood snatches Fiona by swinging from a vine and believes that Shrek is a monster who has taken Fiona. Afterward, his merry men show up to sing a song about him as a hero and tries to stab Shrek midway through his song before Fiona knocks him and his friends out. To scrutinize here a second, Part of me believes that Monsieur had genuinely believed he was doing what's right, but he's doing it in an overzealous, misguided way that sort of puts him into the bad guy territory. I mean, back then, ogres were seen as deadly creatures, and it's likely Hood and his men bought into that propaganda. Though, it would seem that Monsieur H and his gang made peace with Shrek and his group as they are seen dancing in Shrek's swamp at the end, and they even appear in the karaoke short singing the YMCA song. The other group not related to Farquaad is an angry mob of ogre hunters seen at the start of the first movie. I know the franchise has shown other mobs chasing Shrek before, but I'm choosing to analyze this one because it's the mob that the audience spends the most time with, and they speak, with their voices being supplied by Clive Pierce, the movie's director Andrew Adamson, and the deceased Peter Dennis. The mob first appears when they try to sneak into Shrek's swamp, keyword being try, as Shrek manages to spot them and sneaks up behind them. I don't really have much to say about this mob other than that they speak in heavy British accents, Shrek having a near-civil discussion with them when he makes himself known, and the ogre pulling off the most frightening roar imaginable to scare them off. To end things off here, like with Monsieur Hood and his merry men, they're less black and white villains and more forces who brought into the ogres are inherently bad propaganda. Like I said a few minutes ago, Farquaad and Thelonious will be mentioned again as they did reappear in a simulation ride called Shrek 4D, often titled The Ghost of Farquaad for the 2D version. The attraction shown in Universal Studios Florida and Universal Studios Hollywood, with the latter replacing the attraction Alfred Hitchcock The Art of Making Movies. To get into some trivia about Shrek 4D itself, next to Shrek the Third, it is very divided among the Shrek fanbase, as despite some critics not appreciating the ride all that much, it managed to draw in a huge crowd so long that a second theater in the theme park was converted to use 3D to fill out the lines. John Lithgow and Christopher Knights reprised their roles as Farquaad and Thelonious, but this was on account of how the actors who worked on the first film were forced into the project by how a clause in their contract states that if an attraction based on the movie was ever produced, they would reprise their roles. As for myself, I didn't see the project in the theme parks, but I was lucky enough to own a DVD copy that I would often watch. A lot of people have decided to label this short as non-canon, even though most people at Dreamworks consider otherwise. As for my thoughts on it, I at first didn't mind it all that much. Nowadays though, I do see it as one of the less great forms of Shrek media, since it mostly goes for form over function due to being a 3D attraction. Anyway, getting back to Farquaad, he has become a spirit attempting to again claim Fiona as his own wife. I guess he thinks that by killing her, she will become a human soul and be rid of her ogre form, and he can finally have a queen, but since he no longer rules a kingdom, I don't see any point in that, though he's very likely only doing it out of revenge for Shrek getting him killed. How he was able to convince Thelonious to rejoin him is a mystery. Also, as out there as disembodied spirits is for Shrek, I shouldn't be one to judge, since the Shrek world is filled with magical creatures, and as such, something like this could be something to keep an open mind about. Anyway, there's a new villain introduced in this short, a giant statue of dragon that was part of Farquaad's grave and was brought alive by the deceased wannabe ruler and is voiced by Frank Welker like the real dragon. It has red eyes, likely to symbolize its life, and for some reason, it is able to breathe fire and fly like the real dragon. I guess Farquaad's spirit has the power to grant supernatural abilities to living inanimate beings. Again, not one to judge because of fairy tale logic. Soon, the stone dragon is taken care of when the heroes trick it into going through a tunnel not big enough to hold its wings, causing them to shrink due to the impact of the tunnel walls, and it falls into a pond below. As for Farquaad, to talk about how he plans on executing his plan, he attempts to send Fiona off a waterfall. Yeah, not cliched at all. However, as per the norm with fairy tales, Fiona is saved by her true love, or more appropriately dragon, who proceeds to roast Farquaad till he's nothing but screaming ghost heads. As for Thelonious, he proves to be a rather decent guy about the whole ordeal, apologizing to Fiona and even saving the heroes when they're about to go over a waterfall. The branch he hangs onto breaks, but it's the thought that counts, and he's saved alongside the rest. Also, it's revealed that he has a rather strong body, as after Fiona punches him, repeatedly I might add, he just turns his head back to her like it was nothing, though, a shot to his manhood when Fiona forces down a piece of the raft they were on as him go overboard. other than the video games, alongside the stage musical and a short, all of which I will also be discussing later. Farquaad does play sort of a role in the 2010 Halloween TV special, Scared Shrekless, where Shrek drags his companions to spend the night at the abandoned kingdom of Duloc and into his castle to tell scary stories, and it is rumored that Farquaad's spirit is roaming the place. And in case you're wondering between this and Shrek 4D in terms of Farquaad coming back as a ghost, I prefer this one, mostly because I wasn't a fan of Shrek Forever After and I wanted to see another Shrek project that didn't back then end with an alternate timeline plot. I say back then due to the upcoming 5th movie rendering the 4th one's finale movie title outdated. Even though Farquaad himself doesn't appear, it's actually his memory that's sort of a focus in the special, as Shrek's friends are still pretty traumatized by his segregation, and when Shrek and Donkey are the only ones left at Duloc Castle after the others get scared off, it looks as if Farquaad's spirit is haunting them, with Shrek casually mentioning that Donkey had a part to play in his death. Just to put it out there, I disagree with Shrek, as while Donkey rode on Dragon's head when she ate Farquaad, he was but a bystander, and Shrek should actually take accountability since he called on Dragon to finish the job. Since it turns out it was just an elaborate prank Shrek set up with the help of Fiona and his kids, it's likely he was only saying it to mess with Donkey. For Shrek 2, it introduced the concept of well-known fairy tale characters being the bad guys that continued well into the Puss in Boots franchise. I will now talk about the main one, the fairy godmother. Voiced by British comedian Jennifer Saunders, this human-sized pixie is mostly well known from the Cinderella book as the one who gives Cinderella her dress and a carriage ride to the royal ball. I say mostly known because I'm pretty sure there are a bunch of fairy or other magical creatures who help down on their luck people out. For this version of the character though, she's somewhat of a control freak when it comes to fairy tale lore. By that, I mean she wants every known fairy tale to be acted out as traditionally as possible, which includes leaving monsters such as ogres out to dry since they do not appear in the fairy tale's happily ever afters. This is pretty much on point in her first scene where she appears to Fiona in her old bedroom after Shrek and her father King Harold have a very intense argument during dinner. For context to anyone who never saw the Shrek franchise, Shrek and Fiona were invited to the kingdom of Far Far Away to celebrate Fiona's wedding, and Donkey came along. Fairy Godmother sings an impressive musical number that wouldn't be out of place in a Disney movie. I guess Dreamworks wasn't done mocking the Disney genre yet. Fiona stops her, and when Shrek comes into the room, Fairy Godmother looks rather perplexed that Fiona would marry an ogre. However, this isn't just because her marriage goes against traditional fairy tale lore, as we soon find out that Fairy Godmother and King Harold had a past arrangement for Godmother's son, Prince Charming, to be the one who rescued Fiona from the dragon's tower and also marry her. All because, and spoil alert to anyone who hasn't seen the movie, Harold was in fact the Frog Prince himself, and Fairy Godmother agreed to turn him into a human in exchange for the aforementioned deal. Prince Charming being the guy who was supposed to rescue Fiona from the castle was actually foreshadowed in the first movie.
Oh, you were expecting Prince Charming?
Well, yes, actually.
As a result of Shrek inadvertently messing up the plan, Fairy Godmother forces Harold to find a way to kill Shrek and to get things back on course, which soon leads Harold to hire Puss in Boots to kill Shrek. Of course, to anyone who saw the film, you'd know how that turned out. Fairy Godmother also manages a potion factory somewhere in an isolated forest. I guess despite having magical powers herself, Fairy Godmother needs to make a living, and some might wonder why she doesn't utilize the potions she makes against the heroes. Well, like I said just now, she has magical powers of her own, which would therefore make the potions redundant. Her prejudice against ogres is on full display when Shrek visits the factory to ask her for help on easing some fresh tension between him and Fiona. Since I said repeatedly about how she states that ogres don't traditionally receive happy endings, I won't go into detail about how this visit turned out. Down but not out, Shrek, Donkey and Puss steal the happily ever after potion. Once Fairy Godmother is clued into the theft, however, she actually sees it as an opportunity to push her plot forward, as after Shrek drinks the potion, he and Fiona become humans, and she plots to have Charming impersonate Shrek while manipulating the latter into believing that Fiona would be better off with Charming. This is a great showing of Fiona on Fairy Godmother's part as she proves to be capable of adapting to circumstances that she can turn to her advantage, with a bit of emotional manipulation along the way. Moving into her role in the movie's third half, we see that Fairy Godmother is also willing to force fairy tale characters against their will to follow traditions as she tasks Harold to make Fiona drink the potion. He has misgivings about Charming when he pretends to be a human Shrek, even saying to Harold in a matter-of-fact tone that she does it all the time. To her, it doesn't matter if a fairy tale character has no interest in doing what their stories expect them to do, and she is determined to put any fairy tale who deviates from tradition in their place. Her biggest moment to shine is when she sings the Bonnie Tyler song, Holding Out for a Hero, and let me just say that this song is one heck of a toe tapper. I barely paid attention to the song when I was a kid, focusing more on what Shrek and his friends were doing. Afterward, when Shrek bursts into the celebration to stop Fiona from drinking the potion, what follows is a climatic and somewhat humorous battle between the good and bad guys, which culminates in Fiona revealing that she never drank the potion when she headbutts Prince Charming. When Fairy Godmother attempts to use her wand to blast Shrek and Fiona out of existence, Harold jumps in the line of fire and his armor reflects the attack back onto her, and in a matter of seconds, her body turns into bubbles and her glasses and wand fall onto the ground. Saunders said in an interview years later that Fairy Godmother was supposed to survive and vow revenge on Shrek, thinking that she must have either been next to him and something far away. Alas, this did not happen. I'd say no. Trying to keep the video under 90 minutes, and we have a lot more villains to cover, so let's move on. Circling back to what I said about Fairy Godmother's potions factory, her main employees there are elves. Most of them wear hazard suits since magic is most likely seen as a dangerous source. The elf that stands out the most is Jerome, and while I already covered his voice actor, I might as well go into more detail about him and the other elves. Jerome seems to be a common bureaucrat as he prohibits anyone from seeing the Fairy Godmother while she is busy, but he also looks nervous when Shrek and his friends claim to be from a workers' union affiliated with the factory. As for the other elves, they appear to be simply the security unit of the factory as they try to apprehend Shrek and his friends while using crossbows as weapons. Jerome and the rest of the elves are turned into pigeons when Shrek spills a giant batch of magic potion on them, and Jerome is later seen in pigeon form, informing Fairy Godmother of the missing happily ever after potion. The only other elf I know that has an established voice actor besides Jerome is an elf that barges into Shrek and Fairy Godmother's meeting as he's voiced by the late director, Kelly Asbury. I wonder how the elves reacted if they ever found out that their boss is dead and who might take over the factory because of that, or if they even still have jobs. With that, we now move on to Prince Charming himself. Voiced by Rupert Everett, he is the typical good-looking guy who is supposed to be the hero that saves damsel princesses and marries them. However, he is instead written as a modern-day narcissist who uses his good looks to get by. Before I go on, I should mention that Everett, alongside Jennifer Saunders, auditioned for the role of two well-known Disney villains during its Renaissance era. For Saunders, it was Ursula from The Little Mermaid, and for Everett, it was Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Both of them didn't get the parts obviously, but for different reasons. Saunders didn't voice Ursula because the people at Disney believed that her voice didn't suit the character well, while Everett didn't make the cut for Gaston because he didn't sound arrogant enough. It's stated that they took these criticisms to heart and improved their craft when they were asked to voice the villains in Shrek 2. Getting back to Prince Charming himself, I should note that he isn't an actual royal despite his name suggesting otherwise, as Prince seems to be his birth name. It's unknown why his surname is Charming though, when Fairy Godmother had no such surname, though it's likely she married a person with said name, but decided not to take it, and Prince C is mostly called Charming by anyone who knows him personally. Getting into Charming's personality for a moment, like I said, he is quite egocentric, not surprising from a man who was pampered by his mother all his life. Heck, according to some notes on TV tropes, Prince Charming was supposed to be more immature and childish, and while he still maintains these attributes in the finished film, they were significantly toned down, possibly to make him seem more of a threat, albeit a comedic one at best. Anyway, as stated before, Charming was ultimately the one who was supposed to rescue Fiona due to the arrangement between Harold and Godmother for Fiona to marry him, and therefore, he would end up taking the throne of Far, Far Away. Of course, Shrek beat him to it and, well, you know how the movie goes. When he is tasked to pretend to be a human Shrek after the latter takes the happily ever after potion, we see that while he has the looks for an actor, his prowess as one leaves a lot to be desired.
Charming?
Do you think so? Dad, I was so hoping you'd approve.
It's this bad acting that ends up being the red flag Fiona sees to figure out that something's not right, and when the real Shrek comes, Fiona's worries end up getting validated, so much so that she headbutts Charming after he forcefully kisses her when he thinks she drank the love potion. He is last seen in the movie being courted by Doris, one of Cinderella's stepsisters, during the ending musical number. Before I continue, I'd like to question the relationship between Fairy Godmother and Prince Charming. At first glance, Godmother acts very affectionate towards Charming and tries to keep him from getting upset. However, after the aforementioned headbutt, she doesn't immediately comfort him and instead berates Harold for going back on the plan. This hints that her affection towards Charming was an act, and she views him as a tool to get power over Far, Far Away so her influence can be more widely spread, and has no real love for him. However, it is unclear if this is true or not. And before anyone asks, I will not be including King Harold himself for this retrospective. While he does some rather shady things throughout the second film, he really isn't that bad of a guy, and he slowly comes around to accept Fiona's decision on marrying Shrek. Prince Charming does appear in the short Far, Far Away Idol, where he sings I'm Too Sexy by Drake in the most baritone voice possible, but Shrek, Fiona and Simon Cowell consider this cringy, and Fiona presses a button that causes Charming to fall through a trap door. Also, spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't played this, you can only pick either Shrek and Fiona, Donkey or Puss in Boots. If you pick any of the other characters, Simon will automatically win and sing Frank Sinatra's My Way. And now, let's move on to the third movie, where Prince Charming is promoted from minion to main antagonist. Now, I know a lot of people consider Shrek the Third the weakest movie in the franchise, but personally, I really like it and consider it my favorite of the Shrek films, though not my favorite movie in the Shrek franchise, as Puss in Boots: The Last Wish takes that title. Ever since his mother's defeat, Prince Charming's life has pretty much gone to ruin, as he is forced to earn a living by appearing in a dinner theater where he acts out a traditional fairy tale with him as the protagonist and Shrek as the antagonist, but as stated before, his acting skills are pretty lackluster. It is here where he finally decides to take action and try to take Harold's throne by force and get revenge on Shrek. He gets his opportunity when King Harold dies of old age, when he became a frog again at the end of the second movie. He manages to convince the fairy tale villains hanging out at the Poison Apple, more on them later, to join him, since they've been casted as people who get bad lives. Going forward, I'd say that Charming's villainy is half and half. He does a decent job of taking over Far, Far Away and is able to imprison the heroes to avoid anyone challenging him, and when he hears that Shrek is planning to bring a new heir for the throne, who in this case is Arthur Pendragon, he sends some of his minions to find them, kill Arthur, but bring Shrek to him alive, as he wants to kill Shrek personally. This is sort of where his villainy kind of decays, as his plot to kill Shrek will be in front of a captive audience, since he arranges for a rather cringy play to promote the execution. He doesn't lose his villain cred entirely, but even then, it's because he has a large sum of villains at his disposal. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoy Shrek the Third, but after giving it some thought, I came to realize that Charming's villainy could have been handled better. Like he could have a potential redemption after reflecting on the way his mother raised him, or if he remains a villain, he'd have a more professional way of handling Shrek instead of doing something ridiculously dramatic. Though, we do see that he has no qualms about killing minors, as when Arthur is revealed to be a teenager, he attempts to kill Arthur, only to back off when Shrek claims that he was leading Arthur on. Admittedly, this was a dumb decision on his part, as a more practical move would be to kill him anyway in the event he comes back to stop him. And wouldn't you know it, he did. Speaking of, I enjoy the start of the play scene as Shrek heckling Charming a few times, and Charming getting riled up was pretty funny. Skipping forward to the end, when Shrek's allies come to save him, Charming has his thugs apprehend them, but Arthur comes and tells them how they shouldn't let their status as villains define them, and how they themselves are responsible for their own destiny. It's a cliched way to redeem a villain, but hey, the good guys must win somehow. Charming, however, is not affected by Arthur's speech and, since he lost all support, takes a sword to impale Shrek, but his aim was off and he barely misses and soon, Dragon knocks down the tower setting of his play onto him. It's currently unknown if he survived since the window of the tower part seemed to be coming down on him. Either way, he appears to be gone for good. We now come to the fairy tale villains Charming manages to recruit. The first one wasn't a villain in her fairy tale, but the protagonist, Rapunzel. Voiced by Maya Rudolph, she first appears as a friend to Fiona as well as the other well-known fairy tale princesses. After managing to escape Charming's forces, they try to get out of Far, Far Away and look for Shrek, only for Charming and his forces to find them, with the bonus of Rapunzel betraying them in exchange for being the new queen of Far, Far Away. To analyze her character for a minute, I'd say Rapunzel is sort of a low-ranking minion as all she does is betray her friends just because Charming is a pretty boy. While she does express concern when Charming attempts to do them harm, she doesn't try to stop him. She also takes up the part as the damsel in distress in Charming's play, but she gets some karma when Gingy pulls her hair down, revealing that her long hair was but a wig the whole time. Guess Snow White's comment about the extensions wasn't far off. And now, we get into the actual fairy tale villains. In order, there's Captain Hook who appeared in Shrek 2, Far, Far Away Idol and Shrek the Third. In the second film, he's voiced by singers Tom Waits and Nick Cave. In the short, he's voiced by Matt Mahaffey, and in the third film, he's voiced by actor Ian McShane, who in the following year after Shrek the Third, would voice Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda. With Hook or his crew members whose voice actors I don't know. Other villains include the Evil Queen, who Charming calls the Wicked Witch, and is voiced by Suzanne Blakesley, the Cyclops Bouncer, voiced by Mark Valley, the Headless Horseman, voiced by Conrad Vernon, Stromboli, voiced by Chris Miller, Steve and Ed, two living enchanted trees voiced by Andrew Birch and Christopher Knights respectively, Mabel, the second stepsister of Cinderella after Doris from the second film and is voiced by comedian Regis Philbin, Rumpelstiltskin, at least in this movie. Also voiced by Vernon, some Black Knights, all voiced by Walt Dorn, and the characters who don't have established voice actors, some witches, gnomes and even, of all characters, Little Red Riding Hood. I'm guessing her getting scared by Shrek and Fiona in the second film was enough for her to consider joining the dark side. Before joining Prince Charming though, it should be noted that they don't like him all that much due to his title as a fairy tale hero, but he manages to appeal to their want for a better life. Captain Hook and his crew stand out amongst the rest of these villains as he serves as the form of entertainment at the Poison Apple since despite his hook, he can play the piano. This is seen in Shrek 2 in a few scenes and he appears in Far, Far Away Idol where he sings Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Sweet. I won't list the other songs he sings when playing the piano, because again, trying to make this video as quick as possible. Anyway, in the third film, Hook leads his crew and some of the other villains like the trees to find Shrek. Here's where a plot hole sort of enters the field as Hook somehow knows where Shrek is. You could argue that during that time, Hook and his men found clues to where Shrek has gone, but I highly doubt that Hook and his men were able to track Shrek down in such a short amount of time, but let's not linger on that. For the other villains, another that stands out is Mabel as she and Doris are both hideous-looking women and the stepsisters of Cinderella and are voiced by middle-aged comedians, with Larry King in the case of Doris. Mabel mentions that Doris was banished from the Poison Apple for joining Shrek's friend circle and Charming gets her on his side by bringing up that she couldn't fit her foot into Cinderella's glass slipper and she plays the part of Shrek's roar in Charming's play. When Arthur convinces them to change their ways, we do learn what some of the villains want in life, like the Headless Horseman wanting to play the flute, the Evil Queen wants to open a spa in France and Captain Hook would like to grow daffodils. I think it's safe to assume that their pillaging days are over and they've been sentenced to community service to undo the damage they've done to the kingdom. Other minions seen in Shrek the Third were the Royal Guards. In the second film, they do play antagonistic characters, but they were simply doing their jobs as authority figures, whether it be arresting Shrek, Donkey and Puss on the orders of the fairy godmother or trying to stop the giant gingerbread man Mongo. Here though, they follow Charming's rule without question when they try to arrest Shrek and his friends before Artie makes them leave them alone by bluffing that Shrek is an actor for Charming's play. I guess someone has to sit on the throne since Fiona and her mom were indisposed. The guards heard speaking in the third film are voiced by Tom Kane and Christopher Knights. We now come to the, as of this writing, last theatrical villain in a movie with Shrek as the main character. I'm not saying last theatrical villain in the Shrek franchise, because I have still got to do the Puss in Boots franchise. Anyway, let's talk about Rumpelstiltskin. And no, not the one I just mentioned that was in Shrek the Third, I mean the one in the fourth movie. Lingering on this for a minute, I think that maybe some of the fairy tale characters have two different living embodiments of each other. I mean in the first Shrek movie, we see the three bears and it's implied that Lord Farquaad does away with the mother bear, but in Puss in Boots The Last Wish, they are all present, the mother bear included, but have different designs than in Shrek. Either the filmmakers forgot they used these characters already, or they don't want to go through the trouble of looking through obscure fairy tale lore to find other characters to use. It's probably better we don't think about this for too long, so let's get back to the fourth movie's Rumpelstiltskin, or Rumple for short. Like with one of the evil knights who served Prince Charming in the third movie, he is played by Walt Dorn. He was once rumored to be voiced by Paul McCartney, one of the surviving members of the Beatles, but back then, internet rumors were all the rage. Other actors rumored for him were David Morrissey and Tom Cruise. Soon though, when Walt Dorn did the track voice, the filmmakers couldn't find any other person to match Walt's style for Rumple, so Dorn was ultimately given the part. To reiterate if I didn't already, I won't be going over his fairy tale origins. Rumple, at least this version of him, is shown to be a scam artist, with a carriage filled with magical written agreements that could do just about anything. It's an enigma how he was able to even acquire these, but it's likely he made them himself, and does have magic prowess to ensure these contracts can produce the magic they're promised with. Piggybacking on this for a bit, this means that, next to Fairy Godmother, Rumple is a magic-themed antagonist that Shrek faces, but won't be the last magic-wielding villain in the franchise, more on that later. Rumple also serves as the second outlier antagonist of the four main villains that Shrek contends with after Lord Farquaad since he was not involved in Fairy Godmother's bargain with King Harold. For how they differ though, Farquaad was more involved with Fiona while Rumple had more involvement with Harold and Lillian as the two royals visited him in desperation to finally end Fiona's curse. According to Lillian, Rumple was a recommendation from King Midas, suggesting that Rumple was indirectly responsible for that whole Golden Touch business. The deal Rumple offered them is specifically said that all of their problems will disappear if they sign over their kingdom to him. We'll circle back to that shortly because obviously, Shrek rescued Fiona, therefore rendering Rumple's deal redundant. When he appears in present day, we see that he has hit poverty because with Shrek giving his fellow fairy tale friends the confidence to live despite what the stories say about them, they have no need to make their previous dreams come true and therefore, Rumple's business took a nosedive. All this and more give Rumple a reason to hate Shrek's guts, but opportunity knocks when he and his pet goose Fifi witness Shrek having a spat with Fiona about how he misses the old days as a monster who terrified villagers because his family and fame life have driven him mad. When he baits Shrek into having a ride with him, long story, he gives Shrek a contract titled Ogre for a Day, which can enable Shrek to once again be a monster who found enjoyment scaring people. The only proviso is that Shrek has to give up a day from his past in order for the contract to be enforced. When Shrek begins debating on whether or not to sign the agreement, Rumple compromises by suggesting that Shrek give up a day he isn't able to remember, like a day when he was an infant. Jumping ahead after Shrek signs the contract, we see that he was transported to a reality where he never existed since, as Rumple explains when Shrek is brought to him, the day Shrek unknowingly handed over was the day he was born. Yep, it's your typical It's a Wonderful Life story. We also see that Rumple has took over far far away and basically ran it into the ground as all of Shrek's friends are either dependent on Rumpelstiltskin to reach some kind of goal or peace, or leading a quite bad life in general. And do you want to know the worst part? Well, I'll let Rumple explain.
But, you haven't heard the best part. Since you were never born, once this day comes to an end, so will you.
it's this part here where I deem Rumple as the most dangerous of the Shrek villains. Think about it, with just a magic contract, he has managed to turn a kingdom into a dystopia and has effectively ruined the lives of all of Shrek's allies, of which I think you'll have to watch the movie itself to know what I'm talking about, and even managed to erase Shrek from existence, and that once the day is over, Shrek will actually fade from existence. During this scene, we find out what would happen if Harold and Lillian signed the contract from the start of the movie. As it turns out, not only did they sign the kingdom to him, but the magic from the contract made them disappear from existence as well. If you compare this against the rest of the crimes the other Shrek villains I just talked about, then you'd see that Rumple was the worst Shrek villain of them all in terms of how intense his villainy is. Farquaad was a short guy who segregated fairy tale creatures, but that's mild compared to Rumple using and abusing them to feel powerful. Fairy Godmother had magic, but while she does use it against the heroes, she never used it to do something as insane as messing with the space-time continuum, and while Prince Charming took over Far Far Away and turned it into a dystopia, he never subjected his enemies to fates worse than death. See the pattern? Well, anyway, after Shrek manages to escape with an enslaved donkey, he soon learns that the contract is an escape clause where he must receive a kiss of true love. Yeah, corny, but Shrek has to bring back the original reality somehow. According to Donkey, and as a reference to the story Rumple originated from, there was a previous clause where the contract would be nullified if the one who signed the contract said his name, but that has since become redundant since he has become the most well-known figure. Rumple himself is smart enough to figure out that Shrek might find the loophole and try and locate Fiona, which would restore the original timeline, and as such, he becomes desperate to find Shrek and uses every type of trick he can think of, like sending a bounty hunter via the Pied Piper, more on him later, to promising his subjects an award for finding Shrek in exchange for the deal of a lifetime, a contract that can make any wish come true with the added bonus of having no strings attached. Both of which aren't successful, with the second method backfiring on him as Shrek decides to use the contract to free some ogres that the Pied Piper caught for him, which instigates a chain of events that led to the ogres finally ending his reign, and Shrek almost fading out of existence until Fiona, who fell for Shrek all over again after he proved how much of a great guy he is, and thus, Rumple's ultimate goal of maintaining the alternate timeline fails. Before I talk about Rumple's fate at the end of the film, I'd like to note that despite him being the most foulest being ever, Rumple does have some funny quirks to him, like having a stash of wigs, each catered to a specific position he is in, whether professionally or emotionally. He also behaves rather childishly, like throwing tantrums whenever he's in a bad mood, and getting hyperactively excited. Getting into where he is back in the original timeline at the end of the fourth movie, he is simply thrown in a cage during a celebration at Shrek Swamp where Fifi is blown up and the Pied Piper makes his socks dance uncontrollably, making Rumple do so himself. Rumple is still in the cage, and we see in Donkey's Carol and Christmas-tacular that he is being kept around for the Christmas party, whereas only two scenes include him begging Donkey to free him and him pouring coal out of his stocking. Given him altering the timeline, I feel as though that the coal, and even being caged, is the least of what he deserves. I wonder if Shrek and Fiona send him to Far Far Away to face trial after this. I should also note two things. Lord Farquaad was rumored to be in Shrek 4, but obviously that never happened, and Artie is completely absent in the fourth movie, not even getting a mention. I guess this is because, again, Shrek the Third is seen as the weakest movie in the franchise, and thus, it's unknown what happened to him in the alternate timeline of the fourth movie. One last thing to note is that during the film's production, another instance of Rumple screwing over a fairy tale character would be in a deleted scene where he tricked the Emperor with no clothes on into surrendering his crown in the alternate timeline. He also appears in Shrek's Yule Log, a Christmas-themed half-hour loop featurette on the Blu-ray version of the fourth movie, with all the characters getting into shenanigans, with Rumple attempting to cause mischief, but is stopped by Shrek every time. Now let's segue to Rumple's henchmen. In both the primary and alternate timeline is his giant pet goose, Fifi. Unlike most of the animal characters in the franchise, she is only barely sentient and acts like a real-life animal, with her squawks being provided by Frank Welker. Fifi's main purpose for Rumple is to provide feathers that can be used as pens when someone signs one of Rumple's contracts. That, and she often pulls his carriage like a horse. Hey, some animals need to pull carriages. She seems to be a rather hostile bird, most likely because Rumple trained her to be so, as she shrieks at King Harold at the start of the movie, and in the alternate timeline, she even bites one of the 3 little pigs in their tails. Also, Fifi seemed to be an adolescent goose during the opening with Harold and Lillian, as she looked small enough to fit into Rumple's lap, when in the present, it's implied that only a few years have passed as she aged well into adulthood. One thing to note about Fifi is that unlike a majority of people Rumple interacts with, Fifi is the only one Rumple treats with any semblance of decency. In one scene, he calls her pretty when the pigs groom her, and when Rumple gets defeated, he looks worried when Fifi disappears, and in the ending, after Fifi gets blown up by Fiona's singing, Rumple unsuccessfully tries to do something, but because he's in a cage, he fails. For the last bit I mentioned, this was a pretty crappy move on Fiona's part. Yeah, Rumple committed the most cruelest transgression imaginable, but you'd think the good guys would have let Rumple keep Fifi, especially since she was barely a threat in the first place. Though to be fair, she was trying to eat a blue jay that was passing by, but she's most likely a predator bird and they got to eat. Before we move on, again, I'd like to end things off on a bit of the production that went into Fifi, as according to the Shrek wiki, Shrek was supposed to fly her in the final battle. Rumple's main group of enforcers are a group of witches, who seem to be modeled after the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. The only distinguishable ones are the head witch, Griselda, voiced by Kathy Griffin, and Baba, possibly named after Baba Yaga, voiced by Mike Mitchell. The other witches are voiced by Lake Bell, Kristen Shaw, Mary Kay Place, and Meredith Vieira. Looking into them as a threat, they fly around on broomsticks, sort of like an aerial team, and throw stuff like fireballs and skeleton-themed chains onto the ogres they capture, and seem to be very good at the job. In one scene, like with the Oz Witch, they show that they have a weakness of melting when water is splashed into their faces, with the witch who suggests hiring a bounty hunter even shouting the "What a World" line when Rumple does so. It's unknown how they came under Rumple's employ in the altered timeline, but one thing's for sure, Rumple sure knows how to command them. When the timeline is restored, it would seem that they have made peace with Shrek and his allies as they fly around in the sky during the celebration at the end. There is also the Pied Piper, who doesn't have any speaking line and thus, no voice actor to mention. Rumple hires him to find Shrek, and the Piper, through a clever Trojan horse trick, manages to end up with the entire ogre army and make them dance uncontrollably, while playing to the tune of Peaches and Herb's Shake Your Groove Thing, and brings them to Rumple. Shrek and Fiona are caught in the crossfire, but thanks to Donkey and Puss, they manage to get out in the nick of time. The Piper last appears in the restored timeline where, as I mentioned before, he makes Rumple dance uncontrollably. To give notes about the Piper, he appeared in the first Shrek movie, playing his flute to some rats. Also, his flute has a variety of things that he can control once he plays it, not just ogres and socks, but also witches, as he demonstrates on one of Rumple's witch thugs. He also appears in Shrek's Yule log, playing some songs. The Pied Piper gets a moment to shine in the form of a prequel comic titled Piper's Past, which loosely draws from the original fairy tale. In this version, a villain called the Rat King steals Piper's magical flute to avenge the loss of his rat army, leaving Piper powerless against the very creatures he once controlled. While returning from a music store, a discouraged Piper encounters Donkey, who tries to help him find a replacement instrument. When no substitute proves capable of matching the flute's magic, the two are approached by Rumpelstiltskin, who in this comic is working at the shop. He offers Piper a deal. In exchange for a future favor, he'll retrieve the stolen flute and even remove Donkey, who he calls annoying. No surprise there. Once reunited with his instrument, Piper regains control of the rats and turns them against the Rat King, reclaiming his former power. I never even heard of this comic until making this vid and doing research on the Piper. A minor recurring villain in the adventures of Puss in Boots was inspired by the Pied Piper character. Melliflua Eldritch, voiced by Lorraine Newman, was the youngest of 4 constantly feuding sisters in a magical family, chosen alongside them to guard the shattered jewel tied to the dangerous crown of souls and the imprisoned Bloodwolf. Believing their endless infighting would prevent the gem from ever being reunited, King Borval entrusted each sister with a piece. There's a whole lot of backstory involving that, but I'll save that from when I get to the Puss in Boots section. Anyway, Melliflua, going by the Piper, decided to live life as a con artist by plaguing towns with bees and offered to rid them to the unsuspecting townsfolk in exchange for profit. San Lorenzo was next on her list, but to make a long story short, Puss found out about her scheme and put a stop to it. But in a future episode, the Piper gets redeemed when Puss finds out her true identity and became friends with Puss and his allies. To speak of her personality, the Piper in the show acts like a stereotypical hippie, as she talks in a laid-back tone of voice. Just thought I should point it out. Going back to Shrek 4, Dragon also makes an appearance as a minion of Rumpel's, who has captured her at some point in the alternate timeline. I won't say much about her since she's mostly just a feral beast who most likely lost her sentience after being captured and held captive by Rumpel for who knows how long. Though, we do get a funny moment of Donkey trying to flirt with her and then she eats him. She is still voiced by Frank Welker, for those not in the know. We now come to what I call the Shrek TV special and short villains. Antagonists who are rather small scale compared to the movie versions. I'm going to go out of order for a minute and talk about the villains from the films who have returned in the 2011 Shrek thriller short. While walking home from a puppet show, Donkey, Puss and some other characters begin singing the thriller song to Shrek, and at a nearby graveyard, all of Shrek's enemies, Farquaad, Fairy Godmother, Prince Charming and for some reason, Rumpel, come back from the dead as zombies. The Pied Piper, also a zombie, plays his flute, and soon, all of Shrek's friends become zombified and begin dancing to the thriller song. At the end, it turns out that, much like the actual thriller video, the whole event was a nightmare Shrek had, but his troubles aren't over as he now has to sit through a puppet show, which is a funny event to end on. The next few villains are sort of non-existent. I say sort of because we see at least two of them appear in the franchise at separate points, and the ones I am talking about appear in stories the characters tell during the specials. The first is in the Christmas special Shrek the Halls, and it is none other than Santa Claus himself, voiced by former Disney and Dreamworks director, Gary Truesdale, and Gingy's Christmas story frames Santa as a monstrous figure. Since Gingy is a living cookie and Santa eats cookies, you can see where he's coming from. Santa appears at the end of the special, being the typical jolly Christmas figure we all know and love, except for Gingy, that is. The next three are from the Halloween special, Scared Shrekless. I won't go over the plot since I already spoke of it in my analysis of Lord Farquaad, and in the first scary story told by Gingy, The Bride of Gingy, is about how he wants a girlfriend and the Muffin Man makes him one, who Gingy names Sugar. Like with one of Rumpel's witches, she's voiced by Kristen Schaal. At first, Gingy and Sugar enjoy themselves, but Sugar soon gets needy, causing Gingy to try and avoid her, but eventually, he is chased by a large number of gingerbread women resembling Sugar and the situation becomes a full-on zombie apocalypse. The next villain comes in Puss and Donkey's story, Boots Motel, where the antagonist in this case is the innkeeper, who takes more of a back seat because in this story, it's more about Donkey and Puss trying to outsmart each other as their story gets increasingly ridiculous as it goes on. The innkeeper is voiced by Sean Bishop and goes through two transformations varying on who tells the story. For Donkey, it's Prince Charming. For Puss, it's a giant waffle, both wanting revenge. For the waffle, I'm guessing it's because it's Donkey's favorite snack. For the villain in the final story, the Shreksorcist, 3 guesses to what that parodies. It's actually the very cricket from Pinocchio's story, also voiced by Bishop. His was influencing Pinocchio to act incredibly crazy. The cricket here talks like Jiminy Cricket from Disney's Pinocchio, which makes sense since Shrek is meant to poke fun at the Disney franchise as a whole. An actual version of the cricket would later appear in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, voiced by Kevin McCann, who the filmmakers dubbed the ethical bug as he was never named in the film proper. Anyway, Pinocchio's story ends with him squishing the cricket, a nod to how the character itself ended up in the original Pinocchio story. The final short villain comes from the last short, The Pig Who Cried Werewolf. You can probably tell from the title what this is about. The villain of this feature is actually a female human transformation of the big bad wolf that isn't named in the short but is called by the fandom as the Chef Lady, who is also voiced by Bishop. Also, he can only transform into the Chef Lady in the full moon. When one of the 3 pigs, Heimlich, notices that the wolf has moved into their neighborhood, he becomes suspicious of him, but the other pigs are very doubtful since Heimlich has overreacted to many instances in the past when he spied on their neighbors. However, when they go over to the wolf's house for dinner, they wisen up to what's going on and escape into the night with the chef chasing them while repeatedly transforming back into the wolf when going through some darkness. Now, we come to the villains in the franchise's video games. I'll get the movie villains out of the way, but not go into complete detail about them. Lord Farquaad appeared in many Shrek video games. I won't list them all, but I will say that in the Dreamworks All-Star Kart Racing game, he was voiced by Piotr Michael. And as a note, I won't be talking about the production companies that made these games from henceforth for pacing reasons. For Fairy Godmother, she appeared in the Shrek 2 video game, voiced by Claudia Christian, and she seems to be wearing a pink dress. For Prince Charming, he's voiced by James Arnold Taylor in all of his video game appearances, with his appearance in Shrek Super Slam being one I want to mention as he portrays a corrupt captain of the guards hunting down Donkey for minor offenses. And for Rumpelstiltskin, with Walt Dorn reprising his role, appearing in the video game version of Shrek Forever After. Let's now get into the baddies made exclusively for the video games. For Shrek the video game, which was released on Xbox, instead of Lord Farquaad, it's Merlin from the King Arthur stories. Though, this Merlin and the one in the third movie are very different. Since video games based on movies have their own continuities, let's not think about that, and also, there's no known voice actor for him here. Merlin has taken control over Duloc Hills and kidnapped Fiona and imprisoned her in his tower, and to get to the tower, you must play as Shrek to perform good deeds around Duloc Hills, and once you reach his tower, you have to get past many living objects before facing Merlin himself. This boss fight is admittedly a little unimpressive because all you have to do is run in a circle on a circular platform where Merlin is and hit him a few times. Melrin also appears in a different version of the game, released on GameCube, called Shrek Extra Large, in which his role is almost the same, but he explains to Shrek that he kidnapped Fiona to make Shrek go retrieve his crystal ball, which was taken by the Wicked Ice Queen, who we'll get to shortly. After Shrek fulfills his end of things, Merlin refuses to fulfill his and tries to kill Shrek. Also, the boss battle with Merlin in this version isn't different from the Xbox version, only Merlin has a health bar and Shrek wears the armor he wore in the first movie. Also, from what we hear of the Crown Prince in Shrek Extra Large, Merlin turned to villainy because the Crown Prince called him an idiot. Talk about petty. Moving towards the Ice Queen, like with Merlin, her role varies depending on the Xbox and GameCube versions. In the Xbox version, she is called the Ice Cream Queen, and she has a more minor villain role where she would mess with the sewer system in Duloc Hills and you as Shrek must stop her. In Shrek Extra Large, she serves as a supporting antagonist with a larger role as she stole Merlin's crystal ball and has trapped the evil wizard in his tower, though she still operates in messing with the sewer system. After defeating her in the GameCube version, she gives Shrek a tip on how to defeat Merlin while also telling him where she hid the crystal ball. Like with Merlin, she has no established voice actor. There's another villain in both game versions. You head to somewhere called Sweetsville and must defeat a giant candy robot monster called Frankendrop in a wrestling ring. This is the last of the villains in these two Shrek games I will talk about, as I won't be talking about the small minions or enemies that attack Shrek, or in any future video game based on a Dreamworks property. Just to point out there, Frankendrop has no established voice actor too. Moving on to Shrek Super Slam, I admit this was a very fun game to play when I was a kid. To sum up the story, the levels are based on stories that Shrek and his friends tell Donkey and Dragon's children, the Dronkies. Some of the heroes play the antagonists, like how Puss is a Western outlaw who Gingy faces for simply wanting to eat milk and cookies, how Gingy and Captain Hook, alongside a character I will mention in a minute, wanting to eat Donkey in a cooking show, or Random Black Knight, voiced by Max Koch, who attacks Pinocchio in his story when trying to order from a restaurant with Penny managing the drive-thru and insulting him for his inability to speak properly, and how in the last story, Pinocchio is a villainous puppet who plots to add in Puss, Shrek and Donkey to his collection of puppet monsters, but he managed to succeed with the latter too. And also, I previously mentioned Charming appearing in Donkey's story. However, let's get into the original villains made for this game. The first is Genome, also voiced by Koch, who Gingy fights when the gnome crashes his car into the gingerbread man's house. The second is Humpty Dumpty, also voiced by Koch, who has two villain roles. He first plays the villainous Kung Fu master, Wu, in a martial arts level who faces Fiona, and he happens to be the other character I mentioned who wants to eat donkey in the cooking show level. The third is Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, voiced by Nolan North, who is portrayed as a metalhead-type character who is a rude neighbor to Shrek and Fiona for keeping them awake at 4 in the morning. The final villain, who isn't even in the story mode, is the witch Luna, voiced by Tara Strong. I'm guessing she's an unlockable character to use in the free play levels. Fairy Godmother also appeared in the Shrek Forever After video game, again voiced by Claudia Christian. Here, it would seem that Rumpel interfering with her plan to marry her son to Fiona was but a minor inconvenience to her, as Rumpel offered to make her queen for a day if she captured Shrek. She did and was given Fiona's tiara, forcing Shrek to try and retrieve the tiara. After defeating her, Godmother merely flies away, convinced she's still a queen. While there are numerous other villains in Shrek video games, I'll be stopping here until I get to the Puss in Boots video games, because analyzing every single villain in the games would be ridiculous and time-consuming. For the final villain in the Shrek section, I will talk about one last version of Lord Farquaad from the musical play based on the first movie that came out in 2008 called Shrek the Musical. Played by Christopher Sieber when the show first launched, his role in the play isn't all that different from the movie, with the only notable changes being that he gets a couple of villain songs, like What's Up Duloc, the Ballad of Farquaad, and the arrival of Farquaad and his resentment over the fairy tale creatures is given more depth here. In one scene, he claims that his own father abandoned him in the woods, but the ending of the play reveals that his father, the grumpy dwarf from Snow White, evicted him from his home due to freeloading in his basement. Guess we now see why he was born a midget and why he was so desperate to overcompensate for his size. Just to put this out there, I won't be talking about the play versions of Farquaad's minions like Thelonious or the guards, because their roles are basically the same as they were in the original film. Oh, and in case if you're wondering, I also won't mention Monsieur Hood and his merry men because they didn't appear in the play. Ironic, since they had a musical number themselves in the movie.